So here at the Evolutionary Astrology Network, or EAN, you can study with us through our free weekly podcasts, through our Astro Library, through purchasing our multimedia course segments, and through pursuing homework to become certified as an evolutionary astrologer. Here's our slide on our EAN Astro Library. As you can see, we have 3 different sections here. This is titles and materials from the last dozen years with various evolutionary astrologers that we network with. You can subscribe to a single section, all 3 sections, 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or on a monthly recurring. Here's our multimedia course, of which we currently offer 3 different segments. And everything comes with 3-ring tab binders, DVDs. The DVDs are now streamed online in segments 1 and 2. Segments 1 and 2 also come with the original transcript to Jeffrey Wolf Green's First School, access to classes, 250 hours of audio files, and various other little details as well. Segments 1 and 2, as I said, have free monthly webinar classes, and so if you're from the general public and you're not a registered student with us, you can ask for a free sample download of an actual class from either segment 1 or segment 2 if you're curious in pursuing your studies further. All right, Uranus went retrograde exactly 1 week ago. And so let's move into our material and start working through it. I have a lot of material. I'm hoping I can get through everything in the next 2 hours. First of all, here's your retrograde dates for you and the degrees. Last Monday, July 21st, Uranus went retrograde at 16.5 degrees Aries. It goes direct exactly 5 months later, December 21st, the winter solstice, at 12.5 degrees Aries. Here is a visual for you on the astronomy of how a retrograde appears from here on Earth. Whenever we're looking at the outer planets, Mars, Jupiter, on out in the solar system, the Earth is between the Sun and the planet. So the outer planets are closest to Earth with their retrogrades, and if you follow the arrows, you will see how it visually looks from our perspective in the skies. Little astronomy for you on Uranus. Its revolution around the Sun and the zodiac is 84.01 years, and I can't believe that the science of astronomy actually says 0.01. How's that for some math? Its mean daily motion is about 42 seconds in a day if you average it out. It has a retrograde cycle annually once every 5 months. So Uranus is actually retrograde about 42% of the time. Its retrograde period is 155 days. And it stands still or stationary 6 days when it turns retrograde. So here we are 7 days later. Uranus is just beginning to move. So if you go 6 days, it's 3 days before it turns retrograde, 3 days after that it appears to stand still. It has that same stationary period when it turns direct as well at the end of its retrograde cycle. Uranus is known as one of the ice giants, and it's made up of a lot of hydrogen and helium and gas in the form of methane that is so cold it's ice. Uranus's composition is almost identical to Neptune. It is the only planet in our solar system to spin on its side. And there are a couple of theories of that for that. It either got hit by something outside of our solar system and knocked it on its side, or it had a moon separate from it and it had such a gravitational pull that it pulled it onto its side. Those are the 2 theories. We don't really know how it came to be, but those of us who know Uranus as being unique and different can really relate to that planet spinning on its side. It also has rings. You can barely see it in the picture on your slide in the upper right. Need a telescope to really look at those. Black dust particles, rocks, the rings are smaller than Saturn's. Uranus to date has 27 moons. 5 of these are large moons, and you can see their names at the bottom of the screen. Uranus is actually visible to the naked eye. As I was doing my prep, I didn't believe it. I had to search a couple of different sites, and yes, it is actually visible to the naked eye, but because it is so small and so distant, we take it for a star, and that's why it took a while for it to be discovered with a telescope, actually. It is the 3rd largest planet after Jupiter and Saturn, and it is the 4th most dense planet after Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune. It is the coldest planet in the solar system. Even though Neptune and demoted planet Pluto are further out, Uranus is actually colder than either one of those planets. And there is the suspicion that because it is so dense, there's so much pressure on Uranus, that it probably has trillions and trillions of diamonds on the surface and in underneath the surface on Uranus. So those of you who want to go diamond hunting, just plan your next trip to Uranus, okay? Here is the dates of when Uranus... Oh, I have to tell this little story. I have a 4.5-year-old niece, and she loves her Aunt Kimmy, and I think she's going to be a little nature thing. And she has the sun at 0 degrees Aquarius. She has Uranus no, she has Uranus at 29 Pisces. I'm looking at the date up there. She was January 2010. She called me today with my mom and left me a message to tell me that there are 7 planets beyond the sun, and the one that's closest to the sun is very, very hot, and the one that is furthest from the sun is very, very cold. And if I plan to take a trip to that planet furthest from the sun, I better bring a coat. All in her little 4.5-year-old voice, and it was just absolutely darling. It's a voicemail I'm going to save. But anyway, she has moon at 0 degrees Aries. And anyway, I got a little sidetracked when you said that. Leroy, thank you, though. Here's the dates that Uranus went into Aries, retrograded back into Pisces, and then went in again. And as you remember, that March 2011 date is when we had the earthquake on Japan in Fukushima. And here are the dates when Uranus leaves Aries and goes into Taurus. So as you can see, it's a little bit of a longer 7-year cycle, but it still averages out that with all the planets. Here's a little bit of information for you about the last Uranus cycle in Aries. I just thought I'd look up some quick facts. So, of course, it has that 84-year cycle around the zodiac, approximately 7 years in each of the 12 signs. The last time Uranus was in Aries was 1927 through 1934. At that point, we had last quarter squares of Uranus in Aries to Pluto in Cancer. You see the dates. They met 5 times, 1932 through 34, between 20 and 24 degrees of each sign. And of course, we had the Great Depression, kind of similar to somewhat of what we're having now, except there are some differences. Penicillin was discovered with Uranus in Aries. Amelia Earhart became the first woman to fly across the Atlantic. Carl Jung was writing Fast and Furious during that time period. I found a couple of his different publications. You see relationships between the ego and unconsciousness. Uranus is the first of the unconscious planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And how interesting, in the last Uranus in Aries cycle, Jung was really starting to establish those psychological terms: consciousness, subconsciousness, unconsciousness. And as we'll find with Uranus, it is the individuated unconsciousness in EA. There were a lot of vitamins discovered when Uranus was in Aries. Vitamin K, A, D, B2 was discovered. They learned how to synthesize and make synthetic vitamin C when Uranus was in Aries. The female hormone estrone, which we now know as estrogen, was discovered then. Kodak introduced, and I may have that spelled wrong, Kodak introduced a 16 millimeter color film, and they were doing experiments with color TV throughout Uranus in Aries. Albert Einstein came up with his unified field theory. I think that was his relativity theory and the quantum physics theory as they started to blend all that stuff together. Don't quote me on that one. Kenzie came up with a treatise on money, and you will hear a lot about Keynesian economics versus Friedman economics. Keynesian economics is more of a democratic or inclusive economics that when we empower the lower classes, it helps everybody move up. Friedman economics is what became known as Reagan's trickle-down economics. Empower those on top, and it trickles down. And I think what we'll learn to see through this Uranus cycle is that the Friedman trickle-down economics really isn't working. The Keynesian economics had a lot to do with the New Deal, Aryan term that came about through Uranus in Aries after the Great Depression. Of course, that Black Friday stock market crash took place in the United States. Pluto was discovered through Uranus in Aries. The photo flash bulb came into use. Youth Hostels Association was founded. We elected the first woman to the U.S. Senate. Thank you, international students, for letting me quote some of these statistics, although they're not all to the U.S. The FBI in the United States was organized. Of course, Hitler was appointed German Chancellor. First German concentration camps came about with Uranus in Aries. Here's Carl Jung books again, Modern Man in Search of a Soul, Psychology and Religion. I thought it was interesting. The George Washington Bridge, it is the busiest bridge in the world, and it joins New York and New Jersey. This is the bridge for which Governor Christie got into trouble with last fall, and the independent, what do you want to call it, independent group, organization that is checking into, thank you, you're going to give me the word, aren't you, Leroy?
No.
Oh, okay, I heard you. Anyway, the investigation into whether or not he was involved in the shutting down of lanes of this bridge last fall in a political payback, is still under investigation, and that's going to be coming out in the news here over the next few months. So there's a link to that chart if you had the Washington Bridge chart. Also, Golden Gate Bridge started. The U.S. went off its gold standard the first time through Uranus in Aries. So I just thought I'd give you a few little statistics from the last time we had that Uranus in Aries cycle. Here's some mythology on Uranus, and again, this is not my forte. I just try to get into a few little highlights. It is the only planet in our solar system whose name is derived from a figure in Greek mythology rather than Roman mythology like the rest of the planets. Uranus, from the Latinized version of the Greek god of the sky. Uranus is the father of Saturn, who is the father of Jupiter. And part of the reason why they named Uranus Uranus instead of William Herschel discovering it in the 1780s, was because they were following along Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, each the father of the other as you move out of the solar system. And of course, there's two ways to pronounce Uranus. There is Uranus, the one that gets the joke, and there's Uranus, and those are the two most accepted pronunciations. I have a tendency to say Uranus. We'll see. Maybe there's three pronunciations, but you know, both Uranus and Uranus are accepted in the scientific community. In the ancient Greek literature, Uranus was Father Sky, and he was the son and husband of Gaia, Mother Earth. Supports that EA theory that the female separated herself off and created the male back eons of time ago in history in order to create a stronger immune system and accelerate the immune system and create the survival of the species. There's a book out about it called The Redundant Male. I don't remember who the book's by, but if you want to research that from a evolutionary biological perspective, the redundant male. There are some theories that Uranus was conceived with Gaia by Aether as his father. Uranus and Gaia in Greek mythology were the parents of the first generation of Titans, and there were 6 sons and 6 daughters. Astrology, anybody with the Titans? And the Titans were the ancestors of almost all the Greek gods. But in classical Greek mythology, there are no cults, or classical times, excuse me, there are no cults that survived that directly worshipped Uranus, so it's kind of unknown what's happened. The average rule is that Gaia got so tired of being impregnated by Uranus all the time, and of course she was one of the early goddesses of fertility, Mother Earth, that she made a deal with Uranus' son Cronus to castrate him. And it's unknown whether Uranus died from the wound or just decided to withdraw from Earth. When we move into the archetype of Uranus, it is known as the young conscious mind. It is in a planetary pair with Mercury as the conscious mind. In evolutionary astrology, we look at Uranus as the individuated unconsciousness, which contains 3 types of information. It contains the past in all its detail from this life and any past life we've lived. It's what we access with the Akashic record, with past life regression, with hypnotherapy. The individuated unconsciousness contains the suppression of everything in the present life, which is Saturn, which is the individuated consciousness in all its information. And it also contains the blueprint of the future, where our soul is intending to evolve on its own unique nature. When it comes to the blueprint of the future, we need to pay attention to that element of repetition with the future messages that pop into consciousness within our soul. Those future messages can be clairvoyant, seeing, clairaudient, hearing, and clairsentient, feeling or sensing. When we get a future-orientated message that comes once or twice, it's either fantasy or way into the distant future of our life, 10, 15 years. It's a vision unique to us, but quite future-orientated. It's that repetitious element of the future that comes up again and again and again of its own volition. That's the near future. That's the direction or the message of how our own soul is supposed to be moving forward. However, for most of us, we have a fear of moving into the unknown or changing directions, so we tend to ignore those messages until chaos strikes, trauma happens, everything blows up. And then afterwards, we can reflect back and see, oh, I was getting that message to change, but I wasn't paying any attention to it. When you see that repetitious message of the future coming up, clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, and you do follow through on that message, no matter how radical it seems, and it's almost, again, always radical, always a big change. When we follow through on that, we have the ability to minimize the upsets, the shocks, and the traumas. The Uranus archetype also contains that traditional word of what we call friendship. This is where we look for like-minded souls. This is why that Uranus Aquarius 11th house archetype can relate to the group or the tribe or the culture that we connect in with, whether it is Saturnian, traditional type group or culture, whether it is the avant-garde rebels, or whether it's just the groups out there that we're looking for. But contained within that, there is a lesson with Uranus of learning to be a group of one. And that's where we create that archetype of liberation within the soul and finding that courage to become uniquely who it is we are as an individual, to free ourselves from Saturnian consensus. Uranus in general rules electricity, technology, astrology. So all three of those archetypes with Uranus in Aries are initiating brand new 84-year cycles. Hold on to your hat as we watch the changes that'll come about with Uranus in the next 84 years. Chances are we can't even fathom where we'll go over the next century. Uranus rules the brain. It rules the central nervous system. It co-rules the nervous system in general with Mercury. So within that brain, Uranus rules dendrites, and they are the spaces that we create in our brain to hold memory and to hold new knowledge when we learn something that we did not know before. So Uranus rules those synapses, which is that space between the dendrites. And it's that space in between the synapses that has electrical messages. And that's that firing that will go back and forth between the dendrites in the brain. And it reminded me of that message, this what fires together wires together. This comes from a book by Joe Dispenza called Evolving the Brain. Evolving the Brain by Joe Dispenza. And he goes into it from the perspective of how we can learn to refire, then rewire things within the brain. And this is Uranus breaking free from old conditionings and learning how to make those changes we want to make within our life and within ourselves from a mental perspective. And of course, Uranus, Aquarius in the 11th house, rules the archetype of trauma, both in our present life and the accumulation of all the past lives we've had. Trauma is an intense disturbance caused by a shocking event or the accumulation of stress within us that has a lasting effect. Those of you who hear me know that I put SMEP in every time I'm talking about spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical. So the shocking event can be of a spiritual, mental, emotional, or physical nature. So can the accumulation of stress. Now, from the perspective of evolutionary astrology, there is the observation that 85 to 90% of souls are born with past life trauma, which becomes loosely known as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. So we not only created in this life, almost all of us come in with that from a past life, unconscious, subconscious level. And so it has a tendency to dictate a lot of our behavior and behavioral reactions. And part of that liberation process with Uranus is to become aware of that type of trauma and stress and behavioral reactions and to change it. So when we have suppressed trauma because Saturn, that individuated consciousness, wants to hold it below the surface. Uranus is always trying to throw it up. Saturn is always trying to hold the lid on. And so Again, all that trauma that is suppressed then dictates behavior. And you can all just observe that. Why do I keep responding that way? Why do I react that way? And that is unconscious trauma that we have not resolved, that we have not brought into consciousness and healed, that we have not learned how to refire, to rewire mental patterns, understandings, physical patterns and behaviors and actions. So Uranus also rules specifically mental trauma, obsessive compulsive disorders, OCDs, sociopathic behaviors, multiple personality disorder, any type of neuroses, psychoses, bipolar, all of those great words that consensus society has put labels to for anybody who isn't quote-unquote normal. They will all fall into the domain of Uranus. So Uranus in Aries, we're going to see all kinds of breakthroughs in these types of areas, both recognizing these complexes and disorders and coming up with new therapies, alternative and traditional, for healing them. So with this archetype of Uranus in general, it's about making an effort to change the effects of trauma, making the unconscious conscious, i.e. past life regression therapy, such as Roger Wolger's deep memory processing that I've become involved with throughout this last passage of Uranus and Pisces for me. We make the effort to consciously change behaviors with Uranus, no matter what sign it's in, no matter what house it's transiting through. And your natal Uranus archetype by house, sign, and aspect is where you've bought into the consensus. It's where you're trying to decondition and liberate from all that consensus behavior. And it's where you are making that effort to consciously change, to heal your own trauma, to break free and liberate yourself. And so it's about not it's about not suppressing trauma, but working through it, working to heal it. And of course, using all the different alternative and traditional therapies to heal trauma and its effect. All right?
A question on the board, Kim.
Mm-hmm.
To clarify mental trauma, Uranus versus spiritual trauma, Neptune.
Mm-hmm. In many ways, they almost blend into each other. In my astrological studies, I've seen bipolar in Uranus signatures. I've also seen it in Neptune signatures. Neptune generally is spiritual trauma. Uranus is mental trauma. Pluto's emotional trauma. And Saturn is physical trauma. And so you can look for each of those four planets specifically with those types of trauma. Jeffrey Green wrote a chapter in an old Llewellyn book in which he went through the specifics of all of that. And I don't know if Leroy has that in our astro library or not. If you've not come across that, you're definitely welcome to contact us, and I can send you a PDF file on it. Well, I'll see if I can get Leroy to include that when we send it out. But beyond that, though, Uranus rules trauma in general. So you can take spiritual trauma and it can be caught up in Uranus. You can take emotional or physical trauma and it will be caught up within the Uranus, Aquarius, and 11th house archetype as well.
Are there any kinds of mental...
Back in the matriarchal times...
Are there any kinds of mental trauma that are ruled by Neptune?
It's real interesting. What I've been noticing over the years is bipolar, relating a lot to Neptune. And that is where that bipolar in general is where someone is extremely happy and then extremely depressed, extremes of highs and lows. And I have noticed that in charts with Neptune signatures, and I've noticed that with Neptune square the nodes especially. Not every time you see Neptune square the nodes, but I have seen it there. And again, Neptune is going to specifically relate to spiritual traumas, as the rising of the patriarchy has separated us from natural spiritual laws and principles, and we see all the persecutions and victimization complexes. So if I didn't heal that, if that's not answering your question well enough, just speak up to Leroy again. The last thing that I wanted to say with this point is, if we go back to the times of the matriarchal principles when they were still alive long enough, you know, there was always the cleansing ceremonies that would go on with the shamans and the tribe when they come back from war, or somebody experienced any type of trauma, like animals stealing their child and never seeing it again, or you know, wounds or whatever. You know, there would be specific ceremonies that came through time for long periods that would help heal those traumas, so we wouldn't, you know, suppress them and go off into so many psychoses and neuroses or whatever that word is, whenever things are not addressed. And all you have to do is compare that to modern day and what we're experiencing from, well, in the United States, from the wars in, you know, Afghanistan and Iraq, and then ignoring the veterans and, you know, the problems we're having with them. And now Uranus in Aries, where they're just going on, you know, mentally bananas, and not being able to handle that reintegration back into society, because there's not been any therapies to deal with the traumas that they experienced in war. So again, I think Uranus in Aries will have some collective breakthroughs in that area, but it's almost like we're going to go to those extremes, Mars ruling Aries, and watching these wars that are going on right now before we're collectively going to recognize this stuff. So when Uranus is in Aries, there's a brand new 84-year cycle that's being initiated, not only on individual but collective levels as well. And unfortunately, our consensus societies tend to repeat the cycles. Look at the last Uranus in Aries cycle and World War II, and what happened in Germany with, you know, the concentration camps and the gas chambers. And then just look at this Uranus in Aries cycle and what we are seeing as Uranus has moved retrograde, and that explosion, you know, with fighting with, you know, first of all, Ukraine shooting an airplane out of the sky. We haven't seen the last of that one yet. And then what we're seeing going on over between the Jews and the Muslims in the Middle East. We're seeing an escalating of these, you know, that Aryan aggressiveness and a repetition of these cycles. Stay tuned. We've still got 2 more Uranus-Pluto squares coming up. So there's a clinging to the past. There's a clinging on a collective level to all that nationalism. Or Uranus in Aries, we change in some areas and we resist changing in other areas. And this is quite typical for all of us on an individual basis as well as a collective basis. And that change in some areas, resist in others. It goes beyond the evolutionary states. We'll have this taking place in individuated and spirituated states of the soul. And so just reflect within yourself. Where are you making changes and where are you resisting the effort to change? And if you're getting those little repetitious messages about changing, pay attention and make those baby steps forward to minimize the shock and awe or the shock and trauma. So for all of us with Uranus in Aries, there is a desire to have complete and utter freedom to move into the unknown, to move forward in whatever ways we feel comfortable moving forward. And when we sense that we don't have that complete freedom, it creates that instant anger and rage. We get frustrated. We blurt things out. We act out. And then we have to, Aries, do that good old 2 steps forward, 1 step backward and apologize or make amends. So we can sometimes, get overly excited and we can race ahead of ourselves with Uranus, and if we do that, we're going to get tripped up, and just the Libra polarity in general, will point something out to us, and we're going to have to go back and redo, or go back and clean it up, or, again, go back and make amends in some way. So while we all have that excitement of things moving forward, and especially in regards to the squares to Pluto and Capricorn and getting beyond perhaps resource limitations, we are, all of us, no matter how much we want to break free, no matter how much we want to move forward, all of us are going to reach the limits of where we feel secure. And then that 2 steps forward has to go 1 step back to establish security before we can then start moving forward again. So if you can learn this pacing, this is true for all the cardinal signs. And this is really true for Uranus in Aries. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Racing into the future and then becoming insecure, fearful, and finding a foundation before we move forward again. We're all going to be cycling that way. So with Uranus in Aries, trauma and the whole thing of PTSD, this can be re-imprinted, or it can be cast off and broken free from. And that trauma is going to come along to the degree that we resist any signs to change. And those signs, again, the repetitious messaging of, clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient nature. And so all we have to do is look around us on a collective level, and we can see how in all kinds of places we are re-imprinting the traumas. We can see through Jupiter's recent passage in Cancer, Pluto's retrograde in Capricorn pointing to Cancer, the traumas of the children from Central America as they're trying to travel across Mexico to land in the United States. There is an estimate that there's going to be 100,000 children in 2014 that are going to make their way across Mexico into the U.S. They think that figure will reach 150,000 next year in 2015. So think of the trauma that can come on a collective level from these children. Uranus in Aries, I want to be free. I want to find where I can be safe. Cancer square. And they're, the parents that are willing to send them off in that attempt. For all of us then on an individual level, if we're not making changes in our life, if we're not working to create new dendrites and look at things differently, we can get stressed out. We can have our own stresses lead to trauma, lead to PTSD within all of us. So Uranus in Aries, Aries rules the brain or the head. In traditional head to toe, Aries to Pisces rulerships in health and wellness astrology. So you've got a double signature here on issues with the brain, issues with the head. Uranus has rulership of the red blood cells. It has rulership of the muscles. So putting all these together, we can have stress to the nervous system with Uranus in Aries, anxiety levels, impatience, restlessness. It can just cause someone to fly off the handle, pick up the gun and shoot, unfortunately, here in the U.S. It can lead to, I think what we'll do is we're going to see a lot of brain issues like dementia and Alzheimer's come to the news, and we'll recognize that it is growing as a health issue in our elderly population. We're keeping the body alive, but are we keeping the mind alive? And so we will start to see breakthroughs around dementia issues with Uranus in Aries. And there is this thought coming out in the research that Alzheimer's could be caused by a lot of mini strokes in the brain. Stroke is a heart attack of the brain. And if we have a lot of mini strokes, we don't notice them, but they cause an area of the brain to cease firing together anymore. So we lose the dendrites, we'll lose the memory in that area. So stay tuned and we'll see if Uranus in Aries, the research continues to show that it is these mini strokes in those areas that is really the causal factor of Alzheimer's, which right now really doesn't have any testing. One of the other alternative theories is that losing the sense of smell early on towards certain things like peanut butter, and I can't remember what the rest of the foods are, but there are certain foods that if we lose the sense of smell to those, it can be an early indicator of Alzheimer's. At this point right now, traditional science doesn't have a test. It is, just discovered by behavioral concerns. You lose your mind, and then also by the autopsies of the brain. And so that's where a lot of that research is taking place. And of course, we don't need anybody to tell us that Uranus in Aries is just going to be full of technological advances that are going to just leap forward faster than we can make sense of them. Technology racing ahead and spirituality or morality being left behind. And that's where it creates a lot of political chaos. So inventors, leaders, scientists, I mean, expect all of these types of people to be in the news. And it creates a lot of social unrest as entire societies and cultures want to break free from the past. And breaking free to the point that we get to anarchy, which is no rules of any sort. And this could be somewhat of what we see battling back and forth in the Ukraine area and the eastern part of that country between Ukraine itself and Russia. We can start to see more of this stuff coming through as Uranus finishes up this decade in Aries. Uranus in Aries is basically about the courage to become a free soul, to become a liberated individual, to break free from our senses conditioning, no matter what it is for any of us on a personal individual level. And that's where your chart's going to come in. Natal Uranus by sign, house, and aspect, and how Uranus in Aries is relating to that by aspects. How Uranus in Aries is relating to your entire individual chart by aspects. And when we break free from consensus conditioning, we become free to be ourself, our authentic true self. We become free to really actualize our true destiny, or, as EA calls it, that evolutionary intent, the polarity point of Pluto the soul by house and sign and aspect, that north node of the moon and its rulers by house and sign. We become free to be leaders. whether it's an individual level or broader and broader on collective levels. And we are real leaders, and others will follow. And so Leroy's telling me that he has trauma headset trauma. Oh, that's cute. Headset trauma. All right, thank you everyone, because I don't, the Q&A on the board, I don't look at that when I'm teaching because it's too distracting for me. And so I guess if there's questions that I really need to know, tell Leroy to print it, to write it out and give me a post-it note. We work in different rooms so that we don't have that noise thing. And this is the last class we're teaching before we get a break for about 5 weeks. And as I've gotten over adjusting to a new laptop, one of our goals in the next 5 weeks is to really be testing our own headsets. And if any of you were with my Jupiter classes last week, I told you when Uranus goes retrograde, it goofs up communications, as well as a Mercury retrograde. And that seems to be what we're going through, but we'll have it all figured out by the time we start moving back into public classes in September. And we've been brainstorming some ideas. I'll talk about, well, I won't mention them right now, but stay tuned. If you sign up for our newsletter, you'll get the emails as we move into new types of public classes, Uranus in Aries. When Uranus is retrograde, of course, all planetary retrogrades point to the opposite sign. It points to Libra. It points to the consideration of the other, whether it's individually or collectively. And so when Uranus is retrograde in Libra, it's about slowing down in order to actually listen and actually hear what the other is stating. And that is true on both an individual and a collective level. And obviously when it comes to countries, who's good at listening? You know, here's the U.S. trying to be a mediator in the Middle East, and everybody's talking, but is anybody listening? Or does anybody even want to listen? So what we're looking for is that insight as well, to recognize how our actions, Aries, will affect others in our lives. And so that Uranus retrograde in Aries is about learning considered actions. Perhaps I need to do this a different way, rather than wanting to just bulldoze my way through Aries. So there's looking towards how we want to be able to balance ourselves with another, from one-on-one all the way out there to family, squares, Cancer, Capricorn, to friendships, Uranus in general, to our culture, to groups, to the neighbors, to any other, from one-on-one to as large a group as we can relate to. Uranus retrograde in Aries is about helping others in their individualization process. Sometimes what we can have with Uranus is we get caught up in the group, and we get caught up in whatever the group is doing. And when it goes retrograde in Aries, then we slow down long enough in Libra and take a look at the other and go, wait a minute, I'm just going along with it because this is what everybody else is doing, but it really isn't what I want to do. So Uranus retro in Aries will be about evolving and liberating the group, even on collective levels. And if you follow, the consensus collective, you'll hear rumblings while Uranus is retrograde in Aries about how The group doesn't agree with this anymore. It doesn't agree with what their leaders are trying to do, and they want their leaders to listen to them and learn how to do it differently. So this Uranus retrograde in Aries is learning where, when, and how to compromise with the other. And that is balanced with when we need to stand up for ourselves. So when do I compromise and when do I stand my ground? And that is an evolving energy. It's an evolving situation. And from that ebb and flow of compromising, standing up, what we're really looking for is a new common ground. A new way in which we can balance our own independence and uniqueness with the group, with the tribe, with the relationship, with the family, with the culture, whatever it is. I think what we'll see with this retrograde is an initiation of new types of group therapies, especially in that world of PTSD, and for instance in the United States, and how we need to be helping veterans who are coming back from wars with that. You know, children who are traumatized, groups of people who are traumatized from losing loved ones. Who of us, if we follow the news and the Malaysian plane that was, blown out of the sky, there's a group trauma. And, those of us who follow past life therapy recognize that sometimes people are traumatized as a group in wars and fightings. They go out as a group, they come in as a group. Look at the Jews who were, gassed in the chambers the last time Uranus was in Aries. There will, be those types of group therapies that can come along, especially in the alternative areas, but it will evolve in the traditional consensus areas as well. Uranus retro in Aries is going to point to new types of relationships. For example, look at social media. Can you keep up if you're involved in that? Can you keep up with Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all the new stuff that comes on faster than I can keep up with it? But for instance, through this Uranus retro in Aries last weekend, I had family come visit, Leroy had family come visit, and both sides of the family, everybody was just, alive out there with the social media postings, to the point that my 75-year-old mother, who has never used a computer in her life, doesn't plan to, but she's got her first smartphone, and she cusses up and down at it in her cute little way. But she told me this weekend, she says, I'm going to have her youngest daughter, my baby sister, I'm going to have Michelle teach me how to do Facebook from my smartphone so that I can keep up with what all you kids are doing out there. I just thought it was so cute. But, I mean, there was the example pointing to Libra and the Cancer Capricorn squares, and my mom feels like she's losing out on connecting in with her family because she's not on Facebook. So here she is, she says, I'm gonna learn it. So we'll see those types of things just exploding all over. And of course, as many of us know, with the social unrest that's going on and the whole instant communication that's going on with relationships. I read an article here coming out in the media in the United States about how the journalists are really feeling suppressed because of the U.S. government Big Brother thing of following them with their phones and their computers, and how journalists are losing their freedom and initiations. And so here's Uranus retro in Aries, and journalists as a group are speaking out in that direction, and they're having some of our civil liberties groups like the ACLU, and there was another group, and they're talking, bringing this to the surface and the forefront and in the media, and saying journalists can't be journalists anymore because they're afraid of going to jail. They're afraid of being watched, and yet they're not stopping. They're finding new ways of doing it. For instance, one journalist says, "I'm an American citizen. Are you? Aren't you?" And he starts every conversation out that way because there's laws that protect him as a U.S. citizen. And then when he has sources of material, he deliberately makes a gazillion phone calls all across the room, all across the board, so that they cannot follow him or trace him as easily. So here's new relationships coming out in the field of journalism, just trying to keep themselves free and still trying to do their work. And so there's another example for you, just going along in that direction. All right, so I thought that I would just put down, a couple of my thoughts on the archetype in Aries, the archetype retrograde in Libra. I am going to kind of switch genres a little bit here. Leroy, do you by any chance have a ability to speak again? Just to check in and see if there's any questions or anything. And if there are any questions, Leroy, and you cannot speak, perhaps you would run upstairs and give me the question on a Post-it note so that I can answer them.
You are pretty clear now.
Okay, are you back?
Well, I'm just researching different headsets and doing some testing, but I know the echo can be real distracting.
Oh gosh, I wonder what that is. All right, we'll figure it out, everybody, as best as we can. I'm going to move on. First of all, I just want to include in general my slides on why planetary retrogrades. It's a geocentric or Earth-centered phenomena of apparent motion. It's more powerful because the planet is closer to Earth when it's retrograde. And retrogrades come from that principle of psychological compensation, of being out of sync with your own true nature. Whew, that relates to Uranus, doesn't it? Although this is retrogrades in general. Psychological compensations take place anywhere there's a sense of dissatisfaction. And when we feel that dissatisfaction, what happens is most of us compensate. We make excuses. We do what's expected of us. We follow consensus conformity so that we can try to appear like everybody else. We try to appear normal. So for me, as you're looking at this and reading this, planetary retrograde in general is almost a Uranian phenomena. So we look to our status quo to find clues to the types of compensation that we will do. And this is true for each planetary archetype that'll do a retrograde. And those clues will be found for each planetary archetype via the sign, house, aspect, evolutionary state of the soul, and the environmental conditionings. And so with Uranus, the status quo is suppressing our individualization process. Uranus in Leos, we're suppressing our creativity, suppressing our uniqueness. Uranus in Virgo is, suppressing our need to really work with diet, exercise, and rest, making excuses for it. Uranus in Libra is going to be suppressing uniquely being who we are in relationships and liberating the whole process of relationships. Well, I'm going to be in a relationship like everybody else around me so that I don't stick out. So we all have compensations in our lives with all of the planets that go retrograde to various degrees. So when a planet goes retrograde, it offers that opportunity to break free and align ourselves with our own individual natural law. And this is emphasized even more with Uranus. Planetary retrogrades cause us to withdraw from that status quo and redefine the archetype. Who am I as a unique, evolving soul? So when a planet is retrograde, it's a non-static archetype. It's perpetually evolving, and it accelerates our evolution, especially of that planetary archetype. So Uranus retrograde accelerates the evolution of breaking free from all the consensus conditioning in our world. And it's doubly emphasized with a retrograde in Aries. Even though we have to consider the other, we're still wanting to break free and speak up for ourselves in some way in our relationships. So the sign and house of a planetary retrograde will define where we're seeing it happen. Uranus in Aries for all of us. What about me? What about me? I want to break free. I want to do it differently. And the opposite sign and house give clarity and expression. Well, we get to be free, but we don't operate in isolation. We still have to learn how to do it through our relationships. We learn we still have to balance ourselves within our relationships. And whenever a planet is retrograde, answers come from within, not the status quo without. One more general retrograde slide. If we have a natal planet retrograde, this is an individual lesson throughout our lifetime. When a transiting planet is retrograde, we have the individual and collective planetary lessons during the time of that retrograde, 5 months in the case of Uranus. If you were born with that natal planet retrograde and it goes retrograde by transit, temporary harmony and balance. So if you were born with Uranus retrograde, which was 42% of the time, while Uranus is retrograde by transit in Aries, it's going to be easier for you to break free. If you're born when a planet is turning retrograde or direct, everything is intensified. Stationary direct, it's an intensification to throw off the past. Stationary retrograde, intensified to throw off the past. Stationary direct, it's intensified to move forward. Uranus stationary direct, if you were born with that, it's an intensity to really, really be who you uniquely are, and almost continually breaking free from your natal Saturn by sign house aspects. Here is the synodic cycle with Sun and Uranus, because of course, whenever we have any planetary retrograde, the highlight of its retrograde cycle is with the Sun. You can see right here, I put in the conjunctions of Sun and Uranus, along with its opposition. I also put in the shadows, and I found this kind of unique. And I looked forward a few years, but I didn't have enough time to research this over a long period of time. I suspect that this might be true all the time, but Sun conjunct Uranus, and the next day Uranus entered its shadow. Sun conjunct Uranus next day, and the next day Uranus enters its shadow. When I looked forward a few years, there was a little bit of separation by a few days of that Sun conjunction and Uranus entering shadow, but it didn't appear to be moving very much. Stay tuned. I'll have this researched by next year's Uranus retrograde cycle, but I thought it was kind of interesting. Uranus doesn't overlap in its shadow like Neptune and Pluto do. They have much longer cycles, 165 and 248 years respectively with Neptune and Pluto. And here again is Uranus turning retrograde, turning direct, its shadow dates, and of course the opposition to the Sun coming at about 14.5 degrees, Sun Libra, Uranus Aries. This is where we really get the highlights of how we are needing to break free and be our unique self and then how we will manifest it and balance it and share it with others in our lives. That Sun-Uranus opposition, when it's distorted, can be really drawing those lines in the sand and can be quite aggressive and warmongering. In its more evolved expressions, it can be finding new levels of balance in relationship between ourselves and others. It's not always lines in the sand. Mercury is quite active with Uranus. It has 4 aspects with Uranus during its retrograde, and I included the sextiles in early 2015 because it is January 19th when Uranus conjuncts the South Node. Many of us recognize we have Uranus moving, or the South Node moving closer and closer and closer to Uranus, and that conjunction January 19th of 2015 between Uranus and South Node will take place at 13 degrees Aries. And so here's Mercury's retrograde making those sextiles. But remember, Mercury was conscious mind, Uranus unconscious mind, so they're a pretty unique planetary pair, called the lower and higher octaves of the mind. And so Mercury's there in quite a few signs. It has 2 trines, opposition, last quarter squares. So it's really going to be catapulting, triggering Uranus in Aries in considering other perspectives. Just look at Mercury moving through Libra, Sag, and Capricorn as it finishes up that Uranus cycle. So what about the other? What about the other? I can break free, but all of us are trying to break free, and how are we going to do it? Hopefully in some type of harmony with each other. The fact that Mercury has these 2 trines, there is some potential to calm down some of that Uranus in Aries feistiness, aggressiveness, and frustrations as we're looking at all of this. Venus. Look at Venus aspects to Uranus through its retrograde cycle. Venus not only does the trines, it has the waxing and waning squares to Uranus as well. And it goes through the signs then, of course, from Cancer to Capricorn. And so, and I didn't include the minor aspects. So between the square to the square, Venus is going to make the sesquisquadrates, waxing and waning, and the inconjuncts, waxing and waning. So Venus is going to be in every sign from Cancer to Capricorn, making aspects to Uranus. Again, this will emphasize consideration of the other in relationships. And it'll either be triggers like Mercury into those standoffs and aggressiveness, or third time now. I think that this Venus retrograde aspects to Uranus is going to have a very important aspect and interaction with relationships. Both our one-on-one relationships between the evolution of ourself and the evolution of our intimate and one-on-one relationships, friendships. I think it's going to have a strong impact collectively, and recognizing that we are a global village and there are a lot of, we're all interconnected. There is no more isolation. We instantly find out when a plane's blowing out of the air. We instantly find out when, a homeless man or a man who, sells illegal cigarettes on the streets of New York is beat up by the cops. We're all starting to recognize that relativity between us and ourselves. And how do we continue to be a unique individual on planet Earth in the global village? Relationships are changing, everybody. And I think that Venus would be strong in this Uranus retrograde cycle. So follow these Venus retrograde aspects that are highlighted in red. Mars has 3 aspects as it's winding down. Mars has a 2-year relationship with every planet. Mars has 3 aspects, and so this too will point towards we must continue to act in relationship to others as we're breaking free ourselves. So individually and collectively, we are evolving social norms and customs. How you're going to be a part of it within your own family, within your own friendship circles, within your own beliefs. How are you going to act in harmony with others while honoring yourself? We're all going to see the evolution of this, and again, we're going to see the evolution of it on those broader levels with the collective. I took this from my Jupiter slide. It is the only one I really had because I had the time with Jupiter to write out some things. Jupiter's aspects with Uranus are 3 waxing trines. Yahoo! We get to have a few breaks. We get to have a few chillax times through all the intensity of Uranus in Aries. And of course, when Jupiter turns retrograde, they're going to be within orb of a grand trine to each other, Sun, Jupiter, and Uranus. These 2 are just going to emphasize all the explosions in creativity that's going to take place everywhere on the planet. Music is going to, CDs are dying out, DVDs are dying out, everything's going in the cloud, everything's going in digital. The younger generations don't even buy CDs anymore. They don't even have their own music. They go to the digital subscriptions, like Pandora, and there's another one that's coming out there quite taking everybody as well. And so these younger generations, they just listen to music in the cloud. They don't even own it anymore. And my niece is one of them. As you know, we see her once a week. She's our part-time employee, and she just shows us how the younger generations are moving on. Barely does anything with Facebook anymore. She's all Instagram. Jupiter waxing trine Uranus. What breakthroughs are you going to recognize next? Breakthroughs within yourself, as your own brain and your own unconsciousness is evolving. These Jupiter-Uranus signatures, again, breakthroughs or brainwashes. That individuated unconsciousness is becoming more and more conscious, just in general as souls on the planet. And the evolution of planet Earth. I think that veil between the conscious and unconsciousness is becoming thinner and thinner. and it is really thin whenever Uranus is retrograde. Saturn's next aspect with Uranus is the waning sesquisquadrates, or the waning square and a half. In the natural zodiac, this falls at 15 degrees Scorpio. Saturn has one of those aspects just before Uranus goes direct. Remember, Uranus goes direct December 21st at 12.5 Aries. So here is Uranus slowing down. That waning sesquisquadrate, this is the damper. This is the contraction. This is the grow up aspect for Uranus retrograde. This is Saturn really getting into wanting to have authority, wanting to say this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, wanting to lay down the law of the land. Of course, waning aspects, Saturn surrenders to Uranus, and Uranus somehow is going to say, no siree, I'm not going to go by your rules. I'm still going to bust out, break free, and create some discomfort. And so these aspects are where on an individual basis we can have frustration, confrontations with those in our lives. Collective level, more lines in the sand. This is where you could see some religious disagreements. This is where you can see power grabs by countries. On a more evolved level, this is where we could look for the compromises in the power games, and we could look to have the mutual empowerment of everyone. How do we all have our individual rights as groups? And where do we balance power over and power under, and share the power and share the equality? Where do we honor the freedom of all to practice their beliefs peacefully together, side by side? We do not have any major aspects between Uranus and Chiron as it over the next year. We don't have any major aspects between Uranus and Neptune that's going on. Neptune has moved beyond its semi-sextiles. Uranus has moved beyond its semi-sextiles with Neptune. So I didn't bring those two planets up. Moving along to, of course, the Uranus-Pluto squares. We have 2 more to go out of the 7 waxing squares between 2012-2015 from 8 to 16 degrees Aries Capricorn. So the next one is December 14th, right as Uranus is slowing down to turn stationary direct. We could expect impacts from this next Uranus-Pluto squares because of Uranus stationary direct. Stay tuned. It's always going to be the interaction between the haves and the have-nots, between those who are free and those who are oppressed. We could see more things coming out in those regards, individually, collectively, in various countries. And of course I have in here the next and the last, the 7th of the Uranus-Pluto squares. And the last one, of course, is when both of these planets are direct. Stay tuned for more things to still be in the air. I think these Uranus-Pluto squares are just building up momentum. One of the things that we have a tendency to see in collective or mundane astrology is that we have the aspects themselves. They don't always have events exactly on the aspects. There is a follow through in that orb of influence, and we tend to see the upsets after the fact. It's almost like the consensus takes a while to recognize it in consciousness and have things spark and follow through. So I do expect it to be a pretty excitable end of the year still, and I still expect excitement going into 2015 beyond the Uranus retrograde. One of the reasons for this is that 2015 will be an 8-year, it'll be a power struggle year. January 12th, Pluto squares the nodes of the moon. It's just starting to, it'll be an orb within a few months of that. And we also have Uranus conjuncting the south node of the moon, January 19th. And so this is why I think 2015 is start off with a bang. And of course, we still have transiting Uranus opposing the U.S. Saturn, squaring the U.S. Sun's chart. I just put this slide in here from before. Pluto is going to have its squares to Saturn next year in 2015. So excitement is still on the way here collectively. I think it doesn't matter what country it is on planet Earth. I don't think it matters what country chart we're looking at. These Uranus-Pluto squares are going to kick things up. That's just all there is to it. We're going to continue to bust out the old Saturn and Capricorn suppressions and conformities and continue to move forward with the Uranus and Aries liberations. Hopefully on a collective level, the polarity point of Uranus retrograde, Libra, we're going to be able to compromise enough. Here's the listing of the dates that Uranus-Pluto hits the U.S. chart. These dates and hits are going to be pretty accurate, whether you use the Gemini rising chart with the early morning time period, or you use the Sibley chart with the afternoon Sagittarius rising. These dates and degrees are going to be pretty accurate. So Saturn, during its retrograde, is going to make one more opposition to the U.S. Saturn. You see that September 30th. During its retrograde, it will make the second of 3 waning squares, just as it's starting to slow down to turn direct with the Sun. So Uranus's retrograde cycle is still going to kick things up in the United States. It's still going to, we're not done, we're never done. We're going to continue to evolve with social unrest and social uprisings here in the United States, however that's going to turn out to be. Whatever patterns, whatever trends you're following, they're not going to go away. They're going to continue to expand and go on with not only the Uranus aspects, but the U.S. aspects. So children, civil liberties, gender rights, gender issues, medical rights, medical breakthroughs, all of that stuff is going to just continue on here. Moving on with the rest of my time and stepping in, Leroy, are you interacting with questions from anybody that I need to take a break and address as I get a glass of water?
Yeah, Kim, I'll just address the Uranus blackout that we all had there on this for the audio for about 5 or 10 minutes.
I repeated my comments with Venus and Uranus 3 times. Did you hear the third one?
Well, I just hope the recording got it. And to respond to your Uranus information in the Astral Library, Jeff Green's book, Freedom from the Know, is in
Oh,
Section 1.
okay, thank you. That's not what I was alluding to, but go ahead.
And then there's trauma in the outer planets.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think you're referring to, and
Yes.
I'll post that also in Section 1.
Okay.
And remember, we did the entire Uranus and Aries long version.
Got it. Okay. Thank you very much. Any questions in any of this Uranus information?
Nothing coming in.
Okay. Let me see how fast I can do this in 30 minutes. I just jotted down a couple of keywords. I didn't get the time to go back over it and edit it like I usually like to do, so I'm going to have to speak some of this because I didn't get time to write down everything that I wanted to write down. When Uranus goes retrograde in Aries, it's going to create a self-identity crisis because it's pointing over to the other. And Uranus in Aries' first house is such a double signature of me, 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 that they can have everybody in their face. And so there's this confusion around what is me and what is the other. And they really have to go inward and refine themselves. And then come back out and find how to be in relationship with somebody else in entirely different ways. Uranus retrograde in Aries is going to, in the first house, is going to have to deal with the limitations of reality. I want my freedom. I want complete and utter freedom. And I get so frustrated when I'm stuck in this reality of space, time, and this physical body. I can sense myself being without it, beyond it. And so there has to be this breath work of calming down and being okay with the limitations of reality. There can be all kinds of irrational fears that come along here, and there can be all kinds of isolation, and they must find peace with others, and they must recognize that everybody has fear and stress with this retrograde, and that there are others of a like mind that they can share with so that they don't have to get stuck in the fear or the isolation. And they can learn to, find peace in their relationships, find the support group, seventh house polarity, to help them calm down and make peace, and then still continue that step-by-step liberation process with whatever is possible for them to do within themselves. Because this house transit really says you've got to be you. You've got to be true to yourself. And if you're not, the other, seventh house, will shove it in your face, they'll point it out to you, or they'll be helpful in showing you the way. Now, once we really get into that liberation process, then there can be some real strong leadership potential here. And sometimes it's going to require that courage to really be that group of one if you keep getting that message that that is what you're supposed to do. You put this retrograde into the second house, and resources are up and down and all over the place. I have it, I don't have it, I find it, I lose it. You can have some real big upsets if it's there on a karmic level and you didn't share it with the other. Libra, 8th house. Value systems are in chaos because your values don't work anymore. They're not authentic to you anymore. And again, you can have some intense confrontations here from that 8th house polarity in Libra if there are extremes of imbalance with resources or extremes of imbalance in relationships and power or sexuality distortions. You'll have others just throw you in upon yourself. And you can have others trying to take power away from you, and maybe you might have to initiate standing up for yourself. It's going to require finding deeper levels of self-reliance internally. So then there can be a equality of empowerment with others, an equality of sharing resources, however it is necessary to do so, you with others, others with you. And so remember, Uranus in Aries, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's almost always expresses itself like up, down, up, down, up, down. I have it, I don't have it, I have it, I don't have it, whatever house it's going through. So again, that leads to stress. That leads to fears. That leads to feeling like that rug's going to get ripped out underneath you in any house. And Aries retrograde or Uranus retrograde in Aries, you really have got to learn how to breathe. You've got to learn how to go inward and find peace within yourself to then calm all that down. One of the things that Jeffrey Green used to teach about Uranus from the perspective of your herbology is that the herb that related to Uranus was faux tea. F-O-T-I root, faux tea root. It's an oriental longevity herb. You don't want to take it as a tea. You want to take it as capsules of the ground up herb, or you want to take it as tinctures of the herb, because it is known to calm the brain. It replenishes the adrenals. Both of these house transits will have adrenal burnout. Uranus in Aries will burn out everybody's adrenals and hormones, fry them. It'll fry everybody's brain. And so, again, faux tea root has a very calming effect on the brain. It has a calming and regenerative effect on the hormones and the adrenals, which are co-ruled by Mars, Venus, Aries, Libra. And in regards to dosages, as anytime you're doing herbs, herbs are Mother Nature's foods, Mother Nature's medicinals. Herbs are my first choice in healing, personally. You always start out on a small dosage, like 1 capsule or 1 eyedropper full, and then you build it up according to body weight or according to Neptune immune system sensitivities. Now, what I've learned with faux tea, almost everybody can take it. Every once in a while, Neptune, you'll have the opposite effect. And then if instead of calming you down, it amps you up, you have to take herbs that are uppers to calm you down if you have that opposite effect with Neptune sensitivities. But in general, Uranus and faux tea root, you can build up faux tea. And you build, if you don't have adverse reactions, you build up faux tea over time until you really feel yourself calming down, till you sense yourself thinking clearly, and until you notice the adrenals feeling more in balance. Instead of going through the upsets of over energy, under energy, you start to calm down. Uranus interrupts the sleep patterns until you notice yourself sleeping better. Leroy, comment? Did you comment, Leroy?
No.
Okay, I hear the sound when you mute and unmute, so was just thinking that was it. Thank you. Uranus retrograde in Aries through the 3rd house. Of course, communications are just going to be all over the place. Chaos. And you've got to learn how to listen first when it's retrograde with that Libra polarity. And you've got to be able to listen inwardly, because that left brain can get saturated. There's too much excitement going on. There's too many things to consider. Which class, which conversation. Your left brain goes into overload. So you've got to learn to quiet down, involute, and you've got to inwardly listen. And then you've got to learn how to outwardly listen. 9th house, Libra, and really hear what that other person is saying on an intuitive level. And then that's going to calm down all that energy of too much to do and which choice do I make, and all that third house chaos that can just go overboard with this transit. And so again, inner listening, outer listening to calm self down. And then you can also then learn to be who you uniquely are. Because what the other thing that can happen is there's so much information coming in Uranus Aries third house that you can be all over the place with yourself. I'm going to try this on, I'm going to try that personality on, I'm going to try this behavior on, and I'm going to do this and that and this and that and this and that. And you lose sense of self. And so when you can go inward and quiet down, inner, outer, listen, then you get back in touch more with yourself. You get back in touch with making better choices for yourself. And oh, by the way, then your communication with others becomes more in balance. You can say what you mean what you say, and that energy comes back to you as well. This retrograde transit through the fourth house, all the stress goes to the emotions, and all your insecurity buttons get pushed. There can be gender identity issues. There can be childhood parenting issues. You can just feel so stressed out all over the place that your emotions are wired. This is a transit that needs Foti root. And what you've really got to work with is going inward and healing those childhood emotional traumas, the past life emotional traumas, calming yourself down, figuring out the source of those emotional traumas and insecurities, and finding that next level of inner emotional self-reliance. And that's going to let you let go of all that old stuff that's pushing your buttons. And oh, by the way, you get to evolve your emotional IQ with this Uranus in Aries transit. The opposite is Libra on the 10th house. And so there's going to be a maturation process here. And there's going to be somebody in your life, Libra, that's going to be able to help point out where you are needing to grow up, no matter what your age is. Where your emotions are so arrested or triggered that you can't see it from an objective viewpoint emotionally. And so that other is going to be helpful and necessary for the feedback of getting to those core insecurities and emotional issues and then evolving them. And your liberation is being able to find emotional peace and really feel it. And yes, the Uranus upsets will still happen, but you don't get thrown to the extremes anymore. This retrograde in the 5th house, there is a need to redefine your sense of purpose in life. So there can be those creativity shocks of both a good and bad nature. If you are buying into the status quo of what you need to be doing creatively, or if you're buying into your own selfish ego on what you need to do, you will get the creative upsets. People won't buy your stuff. You'll lose the job. Nobody gives you a chance. It can degenerate into a lot of neediness, or trauma dramas, or self-centeredness. And what you are needing to do is that polarity, Libra, 11th house, this is again that need for objectivity. How do I serve the greater whole? And what is uniquely there within me that is of value to contribute to the universe? You've got to inwardly hear with this aspect as well. You will get the shocks of somebody pointing it out to you. But if you can go inwardly, that good old I will, my will, divine will, what would you have me do source? then there's all kinds of creative breakthroughs that'll come through for you. And you will move forward creatively. And sometimes it has to just be on that instinctive gut level. This doesn't work anymore. This is what I sense to do next. And you do it, and it leads to the next thing, and leads to the next thing, and leads to the next thing. That neediness needs to be broken free into really loving yourself. And polarity, recognizing that everybody deserves to be loved. Everybody desires love. Everybody has to love inward with self first before it's shared with others. Oh, and by the way, friendship is the foundation of so much of love. And instead of doing all the trauma, drama issues from fifth house, me first, everybody else saying me first, can you just settle down and find that friendship first, or find that foundation of friendship with the lover? And then you have a mechanism that you can fall back on when everything is chaotic and giving and receiving love. As you're making all these changes, when your lover doesn't seem to be desiring you, or you don't desire them, is falling back on the friendship to find out how the relationship is changing, where it needs to have initiations and breakthroughs. And then if you can fall back to that unconditional love, agape love, and find how to have an equal giving and sharing of that, you can reignite the passionate love in the relationship. Or if the lessons are through, then the lovers go their why in the road as friends. Not love triangles creating more karma, not trauma drama creating all kinds of more upsets. How do I love myself better first, and then how do I love others according to what they need and desire? And from those deeper levels of unconditional love, again, all kinds of creative breakthroughs in how we love. Uranus retrograde in Aries in the 6th house. There's going to be a self-identity crisis again. A lot of it can be from inferiority complexes. It's possible that there could be some inferiority, superiority complex that gets involved there. There can be work traumas and breakthroughs, health upsets and initiations. There can be, this transit can have you prone to crises, mental crises, hypochondriac crises on a physical level. A lot of this is foundationally going to be, buying into patriarchal belief systems, and you really need to initiate more natural laws and understandings of spiritual principles, because then you can get in touch with being gentle and loving with yourself. And that Libra polarity of the 12th house, if you're falling into the inferiority complex, the identity crises, then you're going to be projecting that de facto God goddess onto everybody, and you're going to be disappointed and falling back in on self again. And if you are working to be gentle with yourself, to love self inwardly, to return to more natural spiritual laws and principles, then that Libra polarity in the 12th can lead you to the evolution of natural belief systems, the unconditional loves with everybody following through the last house transit in the 5th, to really finding a natural guru or teacher to study with without projecting upon them, to find relationships in which there is deep giving and service and unconditional love, both directions, you to them and them to you. To have a reconnection with source energy and recognize that source is that inner lover Libra that you're really, truly looking for. And as you reconnect with source, then you can have that magical self-healing, breaking free, calming down the nervous system, being able to breathe, being able to just simplify your life and live day to day, knowing that all's going to be okay, all will be all right. There are new ways of living my life than all of this crises and inferiority and nervous system stress. Finding source energy on the deepest levels possible, and then seeing everybody you relate to as an expression of that source energy. And then there's all kinds of support there for you. When you have this Uranus retrograde cycle through the 7th house, of course, the relationship upsets go all over the place. Hello, goodbye, me versus you, commitment versus freedom complexes. I just can't get along with anybody. I have just got to crawl in upon myself, can't trust anybody, have all the relationship extremes going on. There's no equality going on. Of course, Libra's over there on the 1st house, pointing out this balance that you've got to have between freedom and commitment. It's not the extreme of enmeshment nor the extreme of isolation. There has to be a balance. You have to follow the messaging of when you need to withdraw and be by yourself to relate to yourself. But then you have to follow the messaging of when you need to come out and socialize again and interact again and try out these new awareness of yourself in and through relationships. It's going to lead to the evolution of new relationship values. It's going to lead to new patterns of how to give and receive with others. Honoring yourself as well as honoring others. Speaking up when you need to speak up, listening when you need to listen. And again, as we go through Uranus in Aries, and when it goes retrograde in Aries in general, it's not smooth. It's chaotic no matter what transiting house it is. It is going to be, smooth and easy, good and bad, upsetting and chaotic. It's going to go back and forth. Aries, Libra. That's how it's going to be, balancing out the new you with others, no matter what the house is, no matter what the house lessons are. So you've just got to be okay with the chaos. This transit through the 8th house, this is where we can get into real strong tests of wills. This is the powerhouse. Me versus you, having all the power, having all the resources, all the sexual traumas and healings that can start to come through, all the trust and abandonment issues. Uranus in Aries, 8th house, it's me versus the world, and I have got to get mine before I lose it all. And if you're going to take that selfishness to the extremes, that retrograde cycle is going to throw all the resources issues up into the air, all the abandonment issues up into the air. And Libra's 2nd house, you really will get thrown in upon yourself to recognize that you do have to have a relationship with yourself first before you can merge with another. To throw yourself inward, 2nd house polarity, and recognizing that you are your own resource and you are the one responsible for your physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual needs. You've got to self-empower yourself. Self-empower yourself. You hear that? You got to reach for self-empowerment first. And then you become, as you evolve it in healthy ways, you become empowering of others. You make a deep commitment to someone else and you do not lose yourself. Uranus in Aries is just throwing that whole issue of power, powerless, power over, power under, all up into the air to try and let it settle back down to earth in healthy ways, with a sharing of power, with each person being self-reliant. And then we can have that evolution from karma mate to soul mate. And we get to be free and committed. We take those 7th house lessons into the 8th. And we have that deep merging with someone else. If we lose our resources, you either have lessons of standing up for yourself or you have resource atonement that you need to do. You find yourself going through, sexual distortions. By the way, backing up to the 7th house, there's going to be the initiation of discernment in relationships, when to give and when to receive. The discernment in the 8th house is going to be about when to be intimate and when not to be intimate. That's in the 7th. It becomes stronger in the 8th. So are there things that have been unconscious from past lives that need to be healed, both on the sexual victimization and the sexual predator perspective? Both could be bouncing back and forth depending upon things in your chart. Or there may be one issue that is, repetitive theme, and you've got to balance it out. Victims need to stand up for themselves, walk away, hold the healthy boundary. And if there is present life, prior life trauma towards on the abuse side, then there has to be the atonement. There will be that throwing in upon yourself. You will have others isolating you, even to the point of locking you up if necessary. But for most of us, it's going to be finding new levels of empowerment within ourselves that we then learn how to share with others and empower them. And we co-create together, square to the 5th. 9th house, there can be an alienation to help you break free from all that status quo of buying into all the other belief systems in order to find your own. What is the relativity of truth for me? There can be all kinds of chaos and complexes around the beliefs. There's a need to rebel from the consensus belief systems. There's a need to rebel from the belief systems that you have accumulated up to this point in your life. You need to initiate new directions as your beliefs are evolving. You need to be able to, Libra 3rd house, strike out on your own, even if it's different from what others say. Others are going to point out the weak links in your beliefs. You've got to stop that whole principle of psychological compensation. Psychological compensation is not only a planetary retrograde concept in general. It is a Jupiter-Sag 9th house concept or archetype in specifics. Because if we're not standing in our truth, absolute truth, then somehow we're buying in to status quo, or we're buying into compensating. I don't want to speak up because I don't want to hurt your feelings. I don't know what I really think or believe or feel right now, and I'm just going to float along. And so there's a breaking free from all the areas we compensate psychologically and don't stand up for ourselves. So others are either going to point it out to us, or we're going to hear it some way from others, the weak links to be pointed out. And so then as we learn to stand in that truth, we have to walk that talk. We have to speak that truth. We have to find a way to share that truth in such a way that others can hear us, that others might follow us if we're moving into being a teacher or a leader in some way, if that's what's sparked within us. This transit through the 10th house is going to bring up all the career stresses and chaos. And it's going to be the need to individuate and take charge of our own life. And we could compensate on that or not, or just go with the flow on that. The 4th house polarity is Libra. It's going to throw us back in upon ourselves to look at our childhood and traumas, to look at our emotional traumas and work to heal them as well, so that we can come back out and take charge of our life. There could be all the material upsets if there's been abuses, or if we are buying into our stuff is us. There's going to be the need to find that entrepreneurialism, possibly, if that's the repetitive message we're getting. And perhaps it's leaving the career, or we're pink slipped or fired from the job because that 4th house polarity, we're meant to go within and find that ability to find inner security, to find that self-reliance and to start the job, to start the new career. How many of us, when we are initiating entrepreneurial system, work out of our homes? 4th house polarity. There's going to be depressions if we're not moving forward. There's going to be conditioned guilt if we're not breaking free from the consensus. A strong, strong energy to just liberate ourselves from consensus world, learn how to be in that world but not of that world, and take charge of our life on some of the deepest ways possible, emotionally and physically. That Uranus retrograde through the 11th house, here's where we're going to have the emphasis of trauma in all its many ways. And we could be imprinting it again, or we could be breaking free from it. There will be an emphasis on mental stress. There will be an emphasis on being paralyzed versus moving forward. We could be just racing ahead without wanting to process any of that sub-unconscious trauma, and then we get tripped up, and we land back in the trauma because we haven't processed it. We can be trying to fit in versus accepting our differences with everybody else. That trying to fit in, that's Saturnian part to the Aquarius archetype, where don't notice me, I don't want to be seen, I'm going to isolate, I'm just going to be a group of one because I'm too afraid to go out there, or I don't want to be seen. And we've got to find that courage to be that group of one, to stand out in a crowd and be ourselves if it's necessary. And then we've got to be able to accept that in others, to agree to disagree, to find an acceptance of how we are different. Libra's on the 5th house. Everybody wants to be unique. Everybody wants to be unconditionally loved. Everybody wants to be noticed for who they uniquely are. Can we give that value to everyone else and then find how we all get along? We could find that our friendships are changing, our tribes changing, our groups changing, especially if we are making that effort to decondition and be who we uniquely are. It may be a natural time to let go of some of those old friendships and to open up to those that are evolving along similar paths, values, and ideas like we are. And it's okay. We don't have to keep a friend forever because they've been a friend for a while. And if the friendship is synergistic with who we uniquely are, then that friendship will evolve right along with us. Finally, Uranus retrograde in Aries through the 12th house. There's going to be a breakdown of all our beliefs on the deepest levels. There could be different psychosis that comes along. There are unconscious triggers and stresses. We could go into just escapism. We could again go into isolation. I just want to hide out in the cave. We are meant to initiate a new relationship with source energy, one that's unique to us, that is a one-on-one relationship. That's going to give us foundation through the chaos. And with that Libra polarity on the 6th house, as we are evolving our beliefs, our relationship with Source, we are meant to take it out into the world and learn how to be of service to others, not isolating in our cave because we're afraid to go out or we're too sensitive to go out. We have to learn how to be in that physical world. We can't just go isolate ourselves off in monastery or convent because it's comfortable. We have to, again, be in that world. We have to put our feet on the ground and still have relationship with others, because we can get all of the sparks of inspiration from source we want with this signature, but until we apply it, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't evolve us. And so, look at the escape patterns. Look at the stresses. Look at where you need to go inward. Yes, you can rest. Yes, you can recharge those batteries. But where do you go inward? I will, my will, divine will. Show me where you are, Source. Help me connect with you. Let me see you. Let me find you. And as I'm searching for you, I'm going to do my best to be present in the world and work through my diet, exercise, and rest, and work through my relationships. But let my relationship with you be the deepest one that I'm searching for. When I have that, I have the ability to really be a leading edge force on planet Earth. I can be of a service in some of the deepest ways possible, helping everybody else liberate, initiate, find their true self. All right, how'd I do? All right, hey, whew, not bad. Only 5 minutes over for all my material. I hope this is helpful for all of you. Leroy, any final comments, questions? As I do, I'm going to put up this last slide. Of course, with Uranus, Pluto on a collective level, these are my books for studying finances and really being part of our social movements in creating new initiations collectively that create financial, monetary values, systems that work for all of us. And if you have not looked at the 2 lectures that Robert Gover and I did last year on time and money, past, present, and future, Uranus is very involved in this on a collective social liberation level. I think both of these lectures are in section 3, forecasting of our astral library. Here's the astral library again. Section 3, yeah, forecasting. And finally, of course, I do have dates for the next 2 Mercury retrograde cycles. I am planning August as a little time off and recharge my batteries and look at how I am going to initiate public classes into the fall and winter. So stay tuned for this slide to fill in with new classes. Any comments, questions, Leroy, from the board?
Nope. Nice job, Kim.
Nope, nice job, Kim.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for being interested in studying with me. And I hope that Uranus retrograde just brings you all your heart's desires and freedom, liberating from all of the consensus conditionings and just being all you can be on planet Earth. Thank you, everyone. Adios.